Hello everyone, this is Brian Ka with another video to help you pass the baby bar and the California bar exam. So in this video, we're gonna cover another remedies question. This is from July 2014, and this is question 1. So let's begin. So as you know, I talk about how I like to read the call of the question before reading the facts. And in this question, the call of the question is Percy has sued Daria, and ideally, he would like to finish the project with her. So we know who's the plaintiff and the defendant, right? So here we have Percy versus Daria, right? And because they say he would like to finish the project with her, that kind of alludes to the fact that in this case, Percy, rather than getting legal damages, want to look into getting maybe an equitable remedy such as TRO, um, preliminary injunction, could be permanent injunction. Let's write that down. So it could either be TRO, preliminary injunction, or permanent injunction. And we're leaving one, the most important one, which is um, specific performance. So we have 1, 2, 3, and 4 specific performance. We don't know which one we're going to use yet because we haven't read the facts, but it's definitely, we're going to probably have to discuss whichever one that fits into this fact pattern. So after that, the question says, what remedies may Percy reasonably seek? So um, obviously, this is remedies question, and we want to spend majority of our time talking about the call of the question, which is to answer uh, to the bar graders that you're competent enough to know what remedies uh, you can discuss when you're representing a client. And here we already know that rather than talking about negligence or if this is a contractual issue, rather than trying to you know figure out whether there was a breach, this is asking us to straight up go in and get into remedies. So with that in mind, let's talk about this question and read the facts. So it says Percy and Daria entered into a valid written contract for Percy to design and install landscaping for an exclusive housing development that Daria owned. So it says here they got into a valid written contract. Valid written. Okay. So do we have to talk about whether there was a valid contract? My opinion, I don't think so. I think at most, you can probably say that since the fact pattern said that there was a valid written contract, we're going to assume that there was a valid written contract. So, obviously, we're not going to talk about whether there was an offer, whether there was an acceptance consideration. We're not going to talk about statute of frauds, parole evidence, all that stuff, defenses, impossibility. We don't need to get into that. We just want to focus on what remedies, right? So they got into a contract for landscaping, and it was Daria who was the owner and Percy who was doing the work, right? Percy agreed to perform the work for 15,000 payable upon completion. So the contract amount was contract amount 15,000. Percy estimated that he would work approximately 100 hours a month on the project and would complete the project in 3 months. His usually hourly fee was $100, but he agreed to reduce his fee because Daria agreed to let him photograph the entire landscaping project for an article he planned to propose to Beautiful Yards and Gardens magazine. Okay, that's interesting. So the estimate was 100 hours times 100, right? Which is $10,000, right? So if you did 10,000 times 3, because they said that the project would be completed in 3 months, that's $30,000. Not sure why they're giving us this 30,000, because they already entered into a valid contract worth 15,000 for the same work, right? But it's good to know because they're giving us this to probably, argue both sides, or um, at least talk about it, right? Because these are not there just for us to ignore. The bar graders probably want us to analyze this somehow. So, with that in mind, let's go on. So, he anticipated that publicity from the article would more than compensate him for his reduced fee. So, it's clear that his contractual amount was 15,000. Uh, the original amount that he was supposed to charge was 30,000. That's all we have to know so far. So Percy completed 2 months of work on the project when Daria unjustifiably repudiated the contract. So 2 out of 3, then repudiated the contract. Okay, that's just a mental note to myself. He worked a different project with Stewart in the third month, which paid him 1,500 and took 15 hours to complete. He could have completed Daria's project at the same time. So they're telling us that in month three, third month, he took on a job worth 1,500 and took 15 hours to complete. This right away should trigger in your head that they're probably going to ask us to discuss the mitigation factor. So let's just leave a note here: mitigation. Because the plaintiff has a duty to mitigate whatever they're trying to ask for damages, right? So here we know that he replaced the third month with this mitigating factor. And then next, it says at the time Daria unjustifiably repudiated the contract, Percy was negotiating with Tammy to landscape her property for 30,000. So he potentially had a 30,000 Tammy contract, right? But when Tammy learned it, she stopped negotiation. So didn't happen. Right away, this should trigger something in your head, and that is they're probably going to ask us whether this damage amount was foreseeable, right? And when you when you're talking about foreseeability for uh, remedies, you're usually going to bring that up in consequential, right? So we have this mitigation, consequential, um, valid little written contract, and then the call of the question, as we've already read, said Percy has sued Daria and ideally want to finish the project with her. So issue, this issue, consequential issue, specific performance issue, mitigation issue, consequential issue for sure. That's those are something that we must talk about. So to me, this is not torts. Obviously, you should recognize that by now. It's not talking about injuries, bodily injuries. It's not talking about negligence. There's no negligence here. There's no tort here. This is a straight contractual breach question, right? Contract breach. Okay, so we're gonna have to talk about remedies in terms of contractual breach. And when you talk about contractual breach, the first thing obviously you're gonna talk about is expectation damages, right? And obviously you're gonna have to know the role, for expectation damages. It's basically to make the plaintiff whole. It's compensating the plaintiff had the contract been fully performed, because here there was anticipatory repudiation for after 2 months out of 3 months. Um, so he wasn't able to get paid, right? And expectation damages, we want to make the plaintiff whole again by rewarding him with legal damages or money that he would have received had the contract been fully performed. So here we know that 15,000 is the figure that uh, they that's the amount of their contract, right? K, right? But there is an argument that um, Percy can make. Percy can argue that, you know even though that's the entire contractual amount, his real figure for remedy should be, because he charges the amount the work was supposed to take 100 hours, and he charges $100 an hour, which comes to 10,000 a month times two, because he did 2 months of work, right? And instead of uh, getting this contractual amount, he can argue that this was the figure that he usually charges, and to make him whole, he needs to get 20,000. So I think that here um, we should argue both sides. Argue, obviously Daria is going to want to pay lesser amount, which is 15,000, and she's going to argue that's the contract. We didn't bargain for anything more. On the other hand, Percy can argue that, hey, I was expected to get I was expected to get paid $20,000, right? But because there was a contractual amount of $15,000 under expectation damages, the court will because you have to conclude, the court will probably side with conclude side with Daria that the contractual amount was what was owed to Percy. And maybe we can bring this up when we talk about restitution, because restitution is either increase in value of the land or benefit conferred to the other party, right? So maybe we can mention this, but it would be, I would maybe say this figure will be further discussed under restitution, and then I will move on, right? Now, next we have to talk about consequential, because they alluded to this $30,000 amount. Uh, what uh, what Percy almost got, but as a result of Tammy hearing about this fallout, Percy and Tammy ended up not entering into this $30,000 contract. And obviously, Percy's going to argue that $30,000, should be included in consequential damages. And under consequential damages, we have to talk about the elements and their um, causation. We're going to have to talk about but for, and under that, we're going to have to talk about foreseeability. And this is where the argument may get a little bit tough for Percy, because at the time Percy and Daria entered into a contract, was it foreseeable that if Daria ended up repudiating, that Percy would lose $30,000 of contract? Probably not, because this was never mentioned during their negotiation. But we're going to have to, keep going and talk about, certainty, because that's one of the elements that you need to analyze under consequential, right? So under certainty, the figure of 30,000 was definitely certain, but the argument for consequential damage, the problem is the foreseeability issue. And even though we can say, causation, Percy wins, certainty, Percy wins, because of foreseeability issue, which the court will probably side with Daria in this case, there we're going to conclude by saying that probably no no consequential, right? The next four contracts, usually um, we talk about reliance or incidentals. To carry out this contract in reliance of the promise that they made, the contract that they made, does the fact pattern show anything that reveals Percy losing money? In this case, not really. I don't see any figures that we missed. So reliance, no reliance. Before we get into incidentals, we forgot about one thing for um, expectation damages, and that is whether Percy sufficiently mitigated his damages. Now, we know that during the third month, the $1,500 that he took for 15 hours to complete, Percy's going to argue that he mitigated, right? By replacing for the third month, he did take on a job which paid him $1,500, even though he missed out a chunk of money as a result of Daria's breach. He has a good argument for saying, Judge, I did mitigate my damages, and I did it by taking a $1,500 job that paid over 15 hours, right? So that would be his argument, and Daria would argue, you know, that's not sufficient. You could have taken other jobs, $1,500 from making, as you argued, making you argued that you're making $10,000 from me. It means you could have made at least six, seven, eight, maybe $10,000 if you truly wanted to mitigate. And Daria would argue that too, right? No mitigation. But obviously, because he mitigated, and we also have to conclude for every Iraq, we would probably say that, the court will probably side with Percy because, that was a breach and he didn't even have sufficient time, breach on Daria's part, and he didn't have sufficient time to find another prospective um, buyer who would hire him. So in this case, he didn't have to mitigate, or couldn't mitigate more than what he was able to do. But the damages in the end, the mitigation of $1,500 will probably apply, and depending on what Percy decides to get, he'll probably end up getting that amount minus the $1,500. So I would definitely talk about that, right? So going back to reliance, we concluded that there's no reliance for incidentals, any costs associated with Daria breaching and Percy had to pay in order to make up for that. The facts don't really talk about that either. So, not enough information to, say he did, suffer incidentals. So he should, get some kind of incidentals. But in this fact scenario, we don't really see that. So I would argue no reliance here, no incidental, but for restitution, that's when the defendant is unjustly enriched. And we talked about how for restitution here, we have two ways to calculate that. The first way is uh, to argue that it was the increase in value to the land, and Daria will probably argue that because increase in value to that land will probably be less than what he's going to argue. Percy's going to argue uh, the amount that Daria was unjustly enriched by. The second is, benefit conferred, and under benefit conferred theory, um, he probably has a better argument arguing for this $20,000 instead of the $15,000 contract. So I would bring this up and talk about this again because because for expectation damages, remember I said that this will be discussed further down the line, and I will discuss that and say, you know, because using the benefit conferred calculation in this case, because this is how much he charges for 100 hours, $100 an hour, and it was going to take him 100 hours to complete, uh, and he needed 3 months. So it was $10,000 per month. And using this calculation, using benefit conferred theory, it means since he did 2 months out of 3 months, that he would get argued for $20,000. And because this $20,000 is bigger than $15,000, I would briefly mention that if the court decides to give restitution theory or buy into Percy's restitution theory, then in that case, Percy would argue for $20,000 benefit conferred unjustly, unjust enrichment theory by Daria, and instead of 15,000, the court may award $20,000 instead. And lastly, we talked about specific performance, right? And for specific performance, the first one is usually inadequate legal damages, right? Now, we already talked about expectation damages 15,000. Talked about under restitution theory, we can ask for 20,000. So I guess we can argue both sides, saying, Percy is going to say, there, or Daria is going to say, this, there is enough adequate legal damages because this is calculable, it's certain. You can either get 15,000 or 20,000. So this inadequate legal damages will be a little bit tough. It's going to be a tough hurdle to go over. The second would be equality. The third would be feasibility. And I forgot the fourth one was. I guess we can talk about no defenses. Oh, I guess in two certain and definite terms, there had to have been a contract, and in Percy versus Daria, there was a definite contract. There was um, a valid written contract, so it passes number two. Whether both sides can see, as far as equitable element is concerned, is it equitable for both parties in this case to carry out or perform their end of the bargain? For Percy, I guess, um, you know, he has completed 2 out of 3 months, so completing 1 month is probably not so difficult for Percy. On the other hand, for Daria, he's already done 2 out of 3 months and she was already ready to pay. She just breached, so she didn't pay. So paying either 15,000 or 20,000 shouldn't be that much of an issue. So, for specific performance, I don't think that equitable issue is not going to be a problem. The real issue is inadequate legal damages. But anyway, third, we're gonna probably have to talk a little bit about feasibility, just to show the bar grader that, hey, for specific performance, these are the elements that are required, and for feasibility, for the court to, look over, you know, the 1/3 of work and make sure that it's completed. I guess you can argue both sides again, saying, the court to, oversee this work. One side's going to argue it'll probably be a little bit difficult. Other side's going to argue, all you have to do is call both parties in 2 months and make sure that they follow the rest of the, procedures or rest of what was required to complete this contract, right? So we just show the bar grader that that we understand feasibility, and then I guess no defenses. I don't think that we need to get further into it. So in the end, because inadequate legal damages is a big issue here, um, I would conclude that the court will probably not award specific performance, even though equitability, feasibility, and no defenses may pass, because inadequate legal damages might not, because we have two ways to calculate damages: either 15,000 expectation or 20,000 on the restitution. So I would conclude that because of that, SP argument will likely fail, because the issue was that that Percy ideally wanted to finish out the contract, and that is why we're looking into possible specific performance for both parties to carry out this contract, and that's why we had to analyze it. But in the end, we're gonna have to tell Percy that even though you want to finish the project, because legal damages are adequate in this case, you're probably going to be getting money instead of getting specific performance. So I think that's it for 2014. This one, I think this one was a little bit harder than the last time. Last one, I would rate this maybe like 5.5 to 6 out of 10, just because it's easy to forget one of these, because you have to be very comprehensive and going into every single one, remembering all the elements, and making sure not to forget any of these, to show the bar grader that, hey, I understand the rules, and I'm going to plug in these facts and conclude that hey, this is going to pass specific performance. It's probably not going to pass, and this is what's going to happen. So that wasn't too bad, and I hope if you're struggling with remedies, this explanation may help you, because some people learn better by somebody else talking about it instead of reading. And I guess that's where I come in. If you're a more of a visual learner, and a learner who thrives under conditions like when you have somebody explaining these concepts to you, then I hope that this video will be very helpful, and that you'll keep doing well in your bar studies, and you know pass the bar exam eventually. And with that, I thank you again for watching this video, and I'll see you next time.